Modern pop culture often treats the homunculus as a fantasy trope, a tiny, magical person grown in a jar. In the stone-walled laboratories of the late Middle Ages, however, this was a pursuit defined by a rigorous chemical recipe. The attempt to synthesize human life relied on the biological theories of Aristotle. In his work, Generation of Animals, he argued that life could emerge directly from non-living materials, like soil or grain, a concept later known as abiogenesis. This theory attracted the most respected minds of early science. Paracelsus, the father of toxicology, and Robert Boyle, a founder of modern chemistry, both spent years investigating the mechanics of artificial generation. These proto-scientists sought a method to build a human fetus without natural intercourse. They treated the creation of a person as a technical challenge, attempting to replicate the functions of the human womb inside a glass apparatus. To the early alchemist, the homunculus represented a milestone in natural philosophy. They viewed the creation of artificial life as a systematic engineering problem that could be solved through the precise manipulation of organic decay. The practice rested on the theory of spontaneous generation. Before the invention of the microscope, observers believed that maggots and frogs naturally emerged from rotting meat or swamp mud when the conditions of moisture and heat were exactly right. Alchemists reasoned that if nature produced life from rot on its own, a scientist could isolate and accelerate that process in a laboratory. They began experimenting with different organic materials to find the specific trigger for human development. Paracelsus identified this biological trigger as putrefaction. He claimed that biological materials required a state of controlled decay to break down their original form and reorganize into something new. His recipe was specific. A man's biological material was placed into a sealed glass flask, referred to as a cucurbit. To maintain womb-like heat, the flask was buried in horse manure for 40 days, providing the constant warmth needed to take on a human-like form. Even more extreme methods appear in the Liber Vacae, or the Book of the Cow. These texts described using literal animal wombs and specialized nutrient powders to provide a biological surrogate for the developing creature. This gruesome use of rotting organic matter and animal hosts was a crude attempt to hack the biological requirements of pregnancy. They were trying to build a mechanical substitute for a mother's body. A physical body was only the first requirement. To the alchemist, a synthesized human remained an inert shell unless it possessed a soul to animate it. The software for the homunculus came from the stars. Believing specific rays from planets provided spiritual energy, alchemists used single-point perspective and magic mirrors to funnel the celestial radiation. By positioning flasks at exact angles, they refracted planetary light directly into the fetus. This combination of optics and astrology was intended to open a portal between the physical world and the spiritual realm, dragging a soul into the vessel during the critical fermentation period. For the experiment to succeed, the alchemist had to master two different systems: the messy biological hardware of the Earth and the precise mathematical software of the stars. This entire worldview changed in the mid-17th century. The invention of the microscope revealed a layer of biology that had been invisible to the human eye for thousands of years. This is a 1665 drawing of cork by Robert Hooke. He discovered that living matter was composed of cells, proving that life didn't spontaneously spawn from rot. It was simply developing from microscopic organisms that alchemists couldn't see. Institutions like the Royal Society began prioritizing repeatable, visible evidence. They moved to marginalize alchemical traditions, treating the hunt for the homunculus as a relic of an unscientific past. In 1668, Francesco Redi used controlled experiments with open and closed jars to prove that maggots came from flies, not from the meat itself. His work directly challenged the theory of spontaneous generation that alchemists relied on. 2 centuries later, Louis Pasteur's swan neck flask experiments isolated biological growth from environmental contamination. This finally showed that air alone couldn't spark life, ending the scientific credibility of spontaneous generation. Even as these new rules were written, the transition was slow. Isaac Newton, a president of the Royal Society, secretly maintained a massive library of alchemical texts and homunculus recipes throughout his career. The homunculus was a biological impossibility, but the pursuit of it provided the tools for modern science. The alchemists' obsession with hermetically sealed vessels, precise temperature regulation for incubation, and the careful documentation of chemical changes became the standardized lab equipment and protocols we use today.